Hello everybody, it is me, Game Penguin 21, and today, I think Silksong broke some people today. And, well, with Silksong's massive release over last week on a Thursday, with practically 500,000 on the first ever day of it being available, and the $20 price tag, this is definitely getting some people to kind of rethink some things, and is kind of scary to people who are not understanding what the fuck people want. With all that being said, what exactly happened? Well, there have been several articles here that I'm going to bring up right here, right now. I'm going to flash up on screen that say that Silksong's $20 and isn't just being a problem, it is making people rethink that this might end up affecting one way or another. Now, one game and one price point and one statistic of some kind is not a statistic make. Or one point on a statistic graph is not a statistic make, is what I mean. Now, saying that people are upset with like $80 games and like super expensive games, yes they are. This has kind of been one of those big statements to it. And basically, Team Cherry, the people who made both Silksong and Hollow Knight, has essentially given the middle finger to practically most, if not all, of the industry with this $20 price tag. It's been said in a couple articles, and again, the articles that I have flashed up on the screen. We're going to be reading through one of those articles today, by the way, that being Silksong's $20 tag could hurt the industry, but only if devs let price anxiety win, and we're going to be talking a little bit about that as well. Overall, what exactly is my opinion on this? Well, again, being that I don't really have an income and can't really pay a lot of things for right now, I personally think that $20 is perfectly reasonable for a game if they want to sell it at that price. In all honesty, pricing yourself in the people and for the audience that you want and for the people and that you are wanting to get your money or the people who want to provide your good or service to is important when you're talking about. It is important when selling a good or product or service or whatever. So, we'll get more into the weeds on that as we go through this article. But before we do that, if you like what it is I do and support me in any other way, shape, or form, other than like and subscribe, which is always enough. Links on everything in the description below. Let's get started. So, of course, we're going to start off with Silksong, $20 tag to target the indie scene, but only if devs let price anxiety win. So, starting this article off, we have Silksong will be priced at $20. It feels low for how long it's been in development, and how big the franchise developer and Team Cherry could charge even $30 or $40 and still have sold millions of copies because of the original Hollow Knight. Not to mention, much hype that players had since Silksong since 2019. Still, it really only costs $20. This low price is making some people, including other indie developers, believe the game is so cheap that it will hurt the pricing options of other indie games. To which I have to say, no. You are technically, in one way or another, while yes, you are in sort of direct competition if you're making, say, an indie game development scene, at the same time, what this should tell you and what this should show you is that this should be a fine price point to put if you are an indie developer. They sold millions upon millions of copies. They didn't really care. They made that money back, at least not from what we've seen here, and they made millions upon millions of dollars. This should be a green flag, not a red flag, as some people are talking about here. Now, this is a quote originally from an actual tweet here, if you can see at the bottom, but I'm going to flash up the original tweet from Lone Fungus. Now, Lone Fungus is another Metroidvania game being made by a single developer. There was a couple other people that were also looking into doing this sort of thing. He says, as a dev making a smaller Metroidvania than Silksong, which I originally thought would be fairly priced at $20, what should I price it now? It'll be a 10 to 15 hour plus game, but it was made by one person with limited dev time and funds. I can't afford to give it away for free. You should just charge whatever the hell you think it's worth, like, people buying it at. Like I said before, in the cost-benefit sort of analysis type thing, if you say have 100 people, right? And 100 people are willing to pay $20 for your product, but you run a poll and you have three different price points. You have $10, you have $20, and you have $40. Now, again, you have people who are going to buy one and people who are going to buy another, and you can do the math on this, but I've done it a number of times, and I did it with like a $10, $15, and $20 price tag, and you can kind of elaborate the numbers, but you have three price points. 50% wants to pay the highest, 30-ish percent, 20 to 30% want to pay the middle, with the latter percentage being the least amount. When you add up the percentages, the middle percent of around 80% of your target audience usually is the one where it will be the most profitable. Again, this is very much more optimal results, obviously, because when you're doing like cost-benefit analysis, you have like the regular results, the optimal results, and the other results that you are looking for. So here's the thing. If you want to charge $20 for your game, go right ahead. People will still buy, and people looking at your game thinking, oh, there's another Metroidvania. Guess what? I can now chew on another 10 to 15 hours for another $20. That sounds fantastic, especially if you're using, say, Silksong and Team Cherry as a jumping off point. Now, again, you would really have to make sure that you put you really have to make sure you put the value into those 10 to 15 hours for the most part. And while, yeah, you are a single developer, you shouldn't really worry too much about the costing of the game if you just are doing it for fun. If you're trying to do it to make money, obviously you're trying to do it to make money, and, well, I wouldn't say it's impossible for you to just kind of look at yourself and be like, maybe I should price it a bit lower. If you feel that way, go right ahead and price it a little bit lower. Or, at the very least, what I would say you should do is run a poll. Run a poll of the few price points that you were looking at to make your game, and saying which one seems to be around the most, and price it just a little bit lower than that. Or, if you're stuck on, say, just the $20 prices, then just have a yes-no poll on whether or not people would pay $20 for your game, and you just, redo it from there. It's literally called market research. It's something you could easily do if you have your reach enough for it. And again, it's very easy to look at. But overall, let's continue with the article here. Well, I stop before I continue on another rant. New and small indie devs may think players will compare their games to Silksong if it's anything that'll cost to $20. People will say, this game isn't Silksong, so $20 is too much. The devs fear this will force them to undercharge for their games. This potential pressure to reduce prices could make new games projects unsustainable, since their games isn't Silksong and never will be. So they should make it. So they must be worth less than $20. If dev believes their game is compelling with Silksong across the board, including price, that could lead to or giving up as or has happened, delaying their games to only avoid a release near that of Silksong, depending on how far it spreads. The ripples could reach throughout the indie scene and cause quite a bit of damage, but I think we'll avoid most of this. What people forget is that Silksong isn't in competition with small and new indie games, because its reach and scope are at a far higher level. Upcoming indie games compete with Silksong with their underground bands, complete with Taylor Swift, or the way the article competes with the Washington Post's Pulitzer Prize-worthy features. Now, again, he is actually correct here, and this is probably the most correct you will see a gaming journalism, but this is probably the best way to put this. Yeah, certainly, Silksong is fucking huge. Again, 500,000 players on a Thursday for $20 games just on Steam could really show just how good this sort of game is. We don't have any specific numbers, and I don't have to give those specific numbers, but from what we can aspire these games to be, this isn't even peak hours at the time of me, at least, recording this video. It's probably exceeded that amount, and I am assuming it's probably going to hit 1.5 by the weekend. I'm going to just think that, but if it already hit that number, I'll probably eat my words. I don't really care. But at the end of the day, the concurrent player count doesn't really matter, at least for a single-player games, as like I've said, and the Steam numbers are only just a reference point, and one that could be a little bit off due to various problems. But he is correct. While yes, Silksong does compete on a game level, with direct competition being in the specifically Metroidvania genre itself, the thing is that Silksong is, again, one of those games that is very much so not in competition with anything specific. While yes, it is in competition with most other Metroidvania games, and for a marketing guy to say that yes, there is such a thing as direct competition and general competition and blah-de-blah-de-blah, overall, the devs shouldn't really be worried about this. It's the same thing with, like, I don't know, Elden Ring kind of being very massively successful and winning Game of the Year. It doesn't necessarily mean that all other games will follow suit of Elden Ring, at least in terms of that. it doesn't mean that everything should now be priced at what Elden Ring is, or everything should have the scope of what Elden Ring is, especially when it comes to, again, the open world genre. Elden Ring, much like Silksong, much like some of the other games that usually break out of nowhere, most likely Balatro, probably a good one example as well, from all different walks of life. All of these games, while very successful, while extremely popular and gameplay focused to a nth degree that makes it so that way gamers appreciate it for the price that they do, they don't necessarily put all the pricing on screen when it comes to their quote-unquote budgetary things. I think the problem is that most people, when they assume pricing, assumes a level of polish to a degree. If it's a AAA game priced at like $60 to $70, they should be able to at least assume that there is $60 to $70 worth of content in there. And again, this is where some things like cost-benefit analysis and, like I mentioned before, that whole pricing thing where you can do a poll of 100 people and blah, blah, blah. What I'm saying here, and what I think is important, at least in this conversation, is this won't really affect much and shouldn't really affect much. Just to know that this is a thing that gamers wanted and things that gamers appreciate. They appreciate when a game is priced fairly, or they appreciate when they see a good deal on a game that they deem as good. And overall, yes, Hollow Knight itself is very popular, and people have been waiting for this game for fucking years. And in development hell, and in the ways that they did it, they basically just gave an entire middle finger to say, hey, we don't want $80 games for this game because fuck you, it's our game, and we think we can make a profit otherwise. Overall, you shouldn't take Silksong verbatim. You should take some of the good aspects from Silksong, things like the pricing being fair, but $20 not being standard, obviously. But you should take what people like about games like Elden Ring, games like Balatro, games like Silksong, the gameplay mechanics and the price to content relations-ish, and use that as more of a jumping off point. You don't have to do it very specifically that, but at the end of the day, it's not necessarily like the worst thing to use that as a reference point. One could assume otherwise, since Silksong is an indie game. Other indie games will see this as a direct competitor, but the thing is, indie isn't a game genre. People usually enjoy games from their core gameplay and spend money based on expected patterns. MOBA and hero shooters are free with premium cosmetics, depending on where you go. MMORPGs have a subscription, again, depending on where you go. Fighting games are paid with a yearly character pass. Again, some people don't do that, some people do. And indie Metroidvanias are cheap, depending on who you ask. So let's compare Silksong's price with that of other games in its genre, Metroidvania. The average price of the top 50 best-selling Metroidvanias on Steam is $17, according to Steam DB. That means Silksong's is actually technically more expensive and not less than its competitors. It's only cheaper than the average 31% of all the 100 games, but that includes gigantic AAA productions in that price point. So $20 itself is a fair pricing, according to at least the Steam DB and stuff. It's quite interesting to do this cost-benefit analysis, and most of these numbers are from Steam, so I will say that take this with a grain of salt-ish, because it is a subset of a subset, which I usually basically talk about whenever I talk about statistics like this, because Steam does not mean everything. Steam is a good reference point and a good way to kind of gauge specific trends-ish in that, because Steam is very open, but at the same time, you shouldn't use it as the end-all, be-all. It's more of just, here is the general outlook on it, much like most statistics, I should say. Same thing with the Helldiver statistics from the last video or last week that I was talking about as well. Don't use that as the end-all, be-all. Use it as more of a reference point. Basically, devs anxious about games pricing should focus on the problems that affect their financials in ways that Silksong never will. Devs will have to give Steam 30% of their games, lower the price of specific regions, make frequent price cuts to cater to Steam's sale-addicted user base. No, you don't have to do any of that, because you can do whatever the fuck you want. The developer controls most of it, except for the 30% price of the game sales, which is more of like kind of a bet that they take in some cases, and you'd have to more or less look it over for that. You don't have to really take all of that into account for the most part. There are ways around this. You can sell your indie game on, say, itch.io, or say other game selling websites where you take a bit more of profit. It really just depends on where you want to put your game. Again, Steam is not the only storefront you can sell this game at. You can also attempt to, like Silksong, put it onto other devices, and it's not just Silksong itself that has done this. I think Hypercharged Unbox, which was a game made by like 4 or 5 dudes, also managed to get a release on both consoles, and I think eventually, I think they got their thing onto Switch, but I'm not too certain. But they'd had a Steam release first, and then, ported their game over later. It's the same sort of thing, much like how originally, Balatro wasn't actually supposed to be sold, or wasn't actually supposed to be a thing that the guy sold for money. He didn't really want it to be a thing that he sold, but he put it up on Steam anyway, and it became fucking huge, and he also put it on his phone, and he also put it on phones. It wasn't meant to be that way. It was meant to solely just be a game that he was working on. This was a thing that the guy even said in interviews. So, yeah, certainly, you can price your game however you want to, but at the same time, doing all of these cost-benefit analyses can help you as a reference point, but at the end of the day, you're a developer. You deserve to get paid what you get into this. And I know that in the last video or a couple videos ago, I was talking about how modding kind of is a bit more of a gray area when it comes to being paid, but at the end of the day, you're still technically a developer. You're still technically someone who deserves to get some sort of rebuttal or something for that. But moving on here to the last bit of this article here, everyone who creates a product, including a game, has to worry about competition. However, the level of worry and anxiety some developers are experiencing seems to be blowing things out of proportion. From delaying the release of their titles to not clash with Silksong to consider whether they should charge the same as $20 for their game, the gaming industry is more likely to be hurt by the fear of Silksong's impact than by games' actual releases. We don't need releases to become like the stock market, where bad things happen because everyone freaks out at once, leading to panic becoming real. Okay, so that last bit, again, I don't agree with at all. If that's the main point of this article, that's a very dumb point, really. You basically said that Silksong isn't competing on the same level as a lot of indie games, and people rearranging their release schedule to try to get around it and trying to rethink pricing is actually kind of a good thing, and not necessarily a complete collapse or a complete bad thing for both either the indie scene or the regular scene. Again, it's like how in AAA, when Elden Ring released and when Elden Ring, their DLC released, it basically took over everything in news-wise when it came out, to the point of where games have been trying to avoid releasing around that other game to try to get more sales. It's what happens. This isn't just on the indie scene. This is just a thing that happens in general, where people want to get the most amount of sales and develop the most amount of hype, but they also don't want that hype to die down, and they need to find a good release date that is within a relatively good space to avoid specific competition. This is just how the industry has worked for fucking years, and saying that just because one game that is indie is priced at $20 will negatively affect people, but you only use one example, and that example is of another Metroidvania game, yes, and is of another single developed game, yes, but it is just one person. And again, one person is not a statistic make, at least not necessarily. Overall, while yes, it's not necessarily a trend for all these indie developers doing that, it just might be because there's delays or something like that. What I'm trying to say here is this article basically tries to use the price point and say that that's the cause for all of these things. No, it's not. And I don't think at all that it's a bad thing, this game being $20 is horrible. Why? Because it won over fucking pirates. In an article by Games Radar here, with a DRM-free version and a very low $20 price down, Silksong has won over pirates. Quote, "This is a time where if we can afford to support them, we should." Holy fucking shit. Do you know how fair and how good of a game you have to make for pirates to be like, no, we're not gonna pirate this one. Put it on to the actual fucking thing. Support these guys. This is the shit we want. That is epic. on a number of scales. This right here should scream from the heavens that gamers want good, fairly priced games that are very deep and have good gameplay, good hype around it, a good air around it, and none of this AAA nonsense where they just put everything on the screen and make it look all pretty, but it's all sort of simple and stuff. No, this is why Elden Ring is very popular. This is why Escape from Tarkov and extraction shooters are kind of popular. This is why Hollow Knight and Silksong are very popular. This is why Palworld was extremely fucking popular. This is why, I don't know, like there's so many examples of good popular games that are doing things that gamers want. This right here shouldn't be a red flag of like, oh no, we need to now think that like our games need to be priced less. No, they don't. You can price your games however the fuck you want, especially if you're an indie dev. That's how much you want to get paid. Because if you want to have your income for it, go right ahead and price it however the fuck you want. But at the end of the day, right? This is a good thing because it shows that if you make a fairly decent game, you have a fairly decent output of, well, hype surrounding the game, and you release it to as many places as possible with a price that everyone looks at and says, oh shit, that's a really good price. And then you fucking prove it by making good games that with the gameplay focus that people like. Guess what? You then make money. Holy shit, what a weird concept, right? I know that I'm getting a little bit heated about this, but dude, how do I put this in a nice way? If you're an indie developer looking to make a good game, or looking to make any game, and you're worried about Silksong affecting how people view indie games, don't be. Because while yes, Silksong is very good and is firing on all cylinders when it comes to good stuff, even though I haven't really played it, you should look at it more as a reference point and look at the hype and the people surrounding it and think, maybe I should at least attempt to take 1/10 of that success and aim for that. Silksong is, again, more of an exception and should be looked at more as not necessarily an exact cookie cutter, but rather guidelines to follow. And the three that I take away from this is this. 1, fairly price your games. Whatever you think that the game is worth and whatever you think the game can help you get back to the amount that you invested into it and maybe even more to make a profit, go right ahead and do that. Number 2, make sure the game is good. Don't just focus on graphics. Don't just focus on one particular aspect unless, like, that's the whole point of your game is to focus on one very hyper-specific aspect like some people do. Make it good and make it a playable, good game. And thirdly, and most importantly, don't get scared of other bigger games. Certainly, you can release your game whenever the fuck you want, and you should be a little bit tentative when releasing around bigger games because more people are trying to buy those other games, absolutely. But at the very least, you should look at this and be like, maybe if Silksong can succeed, perhaps if I put in enough effort, I can also succeed at that price point. And it should be a motivation tool, and not like a dissuading thing. Get what I mean? In any case, I think that'll about do it for me ranting into this microphone about a game that I probably will play sometime at least 2 years from now. If you like what it is that I do, once more to my other way, shape, or form, other than like and subscribe, but there is always enough. Links down to everything in the description below if you want to help with things. I also do stream every Sunday at 12 p.m. EST. Come by and say hi, both here and on twitch.tv/GamePenguin21. Everything else you can help me out with, links down to everything in the description below. But my name is GamePenguin21, like I said before, and a peace. Off.
Hey man, can I get a favor? Yeah, sure.